Marinette Hits Her Head, a Miraculous Ladybug fanfiction, written and narrated by Christina Chang. Chapter 1. A Visit. The bell over the bakery door gave a slight clang as Adrien stepped in and walked carefully up to the counter, where Marinette's parents were busily preparing an order for an upcoming event. Sabine noticed him standing and greeted him with a smile. "Hello, Adrien. Is there something I can do for you?" Adrien shook his head and gestured to the cluster of flowers he held in his hand. "Actually, I was hoping I could bring these up to Marinette." He looked down, then added, "How is she?" Sabine's smile faded a bit, but she tried to sound cheerful as she replied, "That is very thoughtful of you, Adrien. Marinette was able to wake up and talk to us a few times, but she's still very disoriented and appears to be in a lot of pain. She probably won't be awake when you go up there, but you can go and check on her if you'd like." A loud clatter sounded from behind her as Tom indignantly dropped the ingredients he had been holding. "What? You're letting him go see Marinette, but I can't?" he exclaimed, causing Sabine to shake her head with a fond sigh. "Seeing a friend from school is different from having your father hovering over you trying to stuff pastries down your throat every 2 seconds. Tom rubbed his neck sheepishly, and Sabine turned back to Adrien. "Go ahead, dear, you know where to go." Adrien nodded appreciatively and quickly headed up the stairs. With his free hand, he tapped on the trap door that led to her bedroom. "Marinette?" he called softly. After hearing no response, he lifted the door a crack and peeked in. Marinette was lying on the daybed, probably to avoid the risk of her falling from the loft, and a pile of cards and gifts could be seen lying across her desk. Adrien closed the door softly behind him and took a seat in a chair that stood a few feet away from her. His fingers toyed with the bouquet in his hands, which was mostly filled with pink flowers, as he knew that was Marinette's favorite color. Or at least, it used to be. Part of him hoped she would wake up, but the other part of him was glad she was still asleep. It would be rather awkward to wake up and find a total stranger looking at you, even if they had been your friend. His eyes wandered back to where she lay. She looked so still, so pale. His face tightened as he saw the few cuts and bruises on her arms, though he knew it could have been much worse. She shivered slightly, her body tensing, and Adrien noticed her blankets had begun to slip. Quietly, he walked over and gently tucked the covers tighter around her. As he did, he noticed a glimpse of red from underneath her bangs and realized she had a long, thin cut just above her left eyebrow. He remembered the intense fear that he and the rest of the class had felt when they were told Marinette had been in a bus accident. She had stayed in the hospital for several weeks, and it soon became evident that she had lost most of her memory. Absently, he fingered the lucky charm in his pocket. Would she ever be able to recover? He looked back at her and was suddenly reminded of a time not too long ago when he had asked himself the same question, standing at a different bedside. He drew back, carefully placed his flowers on her desk, and crept softly out of the room. Chapter 2. An Emergency. "Marinette! Marinette!" a small voice called urgently. Marinette frowned as she tried to sift through the fogginess in her brain. She opened her eyes and blinked slowly as her vision cleared, and she found herself staring into the eyes of a dozen strange creatures all gathered closely around her. Her eyes widened and she squeaked in fright as she weakly flung a pillow in their direction, but the creatures simply dodged it before zooming their cluster above her. She hastily tried to sit up, but was hit with a wave of dizziness and fatigue which forced her to lay back down. A small red creature pushed her way to the front and said reassuringly, "It's okay, Marinette, we're your friends." Marinette stared at them in uncertainty. "What are you? Is this real?" "We're Kwami's. My name is Tiki," the red one said with a smile, before a worried look crossed her face. "I'm really sorry about this, Marinette. We didn't want to shock you, and we were trying to wait for the right moment, but Paris needs you now." "Paris? Me? What are you talking about, Tiki?" Tiki hesitated, then said, "Well, you know how you forgot some things in the accident?" Marinette nodded. Do you remember anything about the superheroes that protect Paris and fight against Shadow Moth? Marinette frowned, trying to remember. She felt like she had a vague memory of there being superheroes in the city, but she couldn't picture what they looked like, let alone their names. Then she remembered watching the news with her parents a few nights ago, and how it had mentioned the city heroes. She brightened as she said, "Oh yes, I saw a report on them. Ladybug and Cat Noir, right?" The Kwamis looked doubtfully at each other, but Tiki nodded and replied, "Right, well, Paris needs Ladybug right now, and that means we need you, Marinette." Marinette blinked in confusion. "Me?" Tiki gestured urgently toward Marinette's earrings. "Those are something called a Miraculous. It grants you the power of creation, and you can use it to transform into the superheroine called Ladybug." Marinette lifted a hand against her forehead in an attempt to process this information, as well as to dull the ache. "But Tiki, none of this makes any sense. My parents never said anything about me being a superhero, and besides, how can I save anyone if I could barely get out of bed?" The room shook slightly as the ground trembled beneath them, and Marinette suddenly became aware of distant shouts and blasts coming from outside her window. Tiki looked hurriedly between the window and Marinette. "Your parents never told you because you have to keep your identity a secret. No one can know that you are Ladybug, not even them. I'm sorry, Marinette. I wish I had more time to explain, but we can't wait much longer, and Cat Noir could really use your help." "Cat Noir?" "He's your partner. Once you find him, he'll be able to help you figure things out, and when you transform, you'll find an instruction manual on your bug phone. All you have to do is say Tiki spots on, and your suit will enhance you physically, so you'll be able to function in spite of your injuries." Marinette looked doubtful. "I don't know, Tiki. I don't think I'm the kind of person who can handle all this superhero stuff. Couldn't you pick someone else?" Tiki smiled reassuringly. "You've done this hundreds of times before, Marinette, and never in all my years have I ever met a ladybug like you. You can do this. The people of Paris are relying on you." Marinette thought hard for a moment, then exclaimed, "Okay, I'll do it." She took a deep breath, then said, "Tiki, spots on." Suddenly, a pink glow rose around her as her body was encased in a flexible red suit that somehow felt natural. Almost immediately, the pain in her head subsided, and she felt an exhilarating rush of strength and energy. She quickly got up, her fingers brushing curiously against the mask that now surrounded her eyes. "Wow, this is incredible." A loud blast came from outside, and the resulting chatter of the Kwamis brought her attention back to the task at hand. "Okay, Tiki said there was a manual. Here it is," she said to herself as she slid open the yo-yo and began scrolling through its contents. After a few minutes, she made her way out onto the balcony and bounced the yo-yo beneath her hand before saying, "Well, here goes nothing." With that, she flung her yo-yo across the rooftops and was quickly pulled up into the sky. Chapter 3. A Familiar Acquaintance. Ladybug scanned the dust-covered streets as she swung carefully across the rooftops above. She could see people running and hiding in fright, while others were compulsively performing strange tasks, but there was no sign of what had caused this mess. She lingered behind a few trash cans and began to make her way down the street, taking a closer look at some of the blast marks that covered the area. Something whistled past her ear, causing her to turn around. She found herself standing only a few feet away from a giant man covered in blue robot-like armor, with two large cannons protruding from his wrists. He began firing in her direction, and before she could react, a dark shape leapt in front of her and began shielding her from the energized bullets. "Need a little help today, milady?" Cat Noir said with a smile, continuing to deflect Roger Cup's fire with his stick. Ladybug looked up at him in relief. "You must be Cat Noir, right?" He looked at her in confusion. "What's that supposed to mean?" Before she could respond, a shot from Roger Cup hit the edge of the roof right above them, and without thinking, Ladybug quickly pulled Cat Noir out of the way. They took advantage of the dust cloud that erupted from the rubble and leapt safely out of sight onto a nearby rooftop. After making sure there was no sign of the villain, Ladybug turned to Cat Noir. "I really, really need your help, Cat Noir. I have no idea what's going on. I woke up a few minutes ago and there were these creatures called Kwamis and they told me I was a superhero and there were all these explosions from that metal guy and then I got these crazy powers and I came out here to find you and... Cat Noir stepped closer to her and put a concerned hand on her shoulder. Hey, slow down. He let her take a deep breath and asked, I don't understand. Did something happen to you, milady? She nodded miserably as she replied, I can't remember anything, Cat Noir. At least not the important stuff. Something happened that caused me to lose my memory, and now I don't know the first thing about being a superhero or anything else for that matter. Cat Noir stared at her in shock and disbelief. You lost your memory? But how? A flash of fear pierced his heart as he asked, Did you renounce being the Guardian? Is that what happened? Ladybug looked confused. Guardian of what? The comics didn't say anything about me being a guardian. Cat Noir looked slightly relieved at that. If all the Kwamis are still with you, then there can't be a new guardian. So, what happened? Ladybug hesitated. She had a feeling Cat Noir was the kind of person she could trust, but the Kwamis had told her to keep her identity a secret, and she didn't want to give away any information that might be connected to her civilian self. That's not really important right now. The point is, I can't remember anything about what I did before the accident, and we need to come up with a plan for now. Cat Noir only seemed to half hear her as he asked, Does that mean you don't remember me? He ducked his head and turned away to hide the pained expression on his face. I'm really sorry, Cat Noir. He looked back at her and felt his own fear subside as he gazed into the troubled blue eyes staring up at him. He breathed in slowly before flashing her a cheerful grin and bowing with a flourish. Well, in that case, allow me to reintroduce myself. I'm the daring, cunning, irresistibly charming Cat Noir. He reached for her hand and added, partner to the cleverest, most incredible girl in the world. Ladybug giggled slightly as he kissed her hand before slipping it out of his grasp and saying, Now really isn't the time, Cat Noir. In case you've forgotten, we have a villain to fight. He grinned and said, Now that's the Ladybug I know. So, do you have a plan? Ladybug peered around the chimney they were standing behind, letting her eyes wander thoughtfully across the street. Well, I know we have to capture the Akuma, so all we have to do is figure out where it's hiding. That won't be a problem, Cat Noir said as he used the telescope on his stick to zoom in on Roger Cobb, who was methodically pacing the street in search of them. Cat Noir pointed to a piece of metal dangling from the villain's neck. We've actually fought this villain together before, so it should be in the same place it was last time, right there in his whistle. Ladybug glanced at the object he was pointing to and quickly ducked back behind the chimney as a sudden bolt of energy flew towards them, causing the edge of the roof to shake from the impact. I suppose all I have to do now is use my lucky charm. She threw her hand up into the air and felt a rush of magical ladybugs swirl above her, before dropping a giant blob of slime into her outstretched hands. Ew, what am I supposed to do with this? She exclaimed, pulling it slightly apart as it oozed around her fingers. Cat Noir shrugged with a smile. Don't worry, it's often weirder than this, but somehow you always make it work. Trust yourself, Ladybug. She looked back out at Roger Cobb, who was still firing at them, and suddenly she had an idea. Of course! The only reason we can't get close enough to break his whistle is because of the cannons on his wrists. If we clog those up with this slime, he won't be able to stop us. Now that I think of it, that's how you defeated Roger Cobb last time, too. Ladybug smiled at him, then asked, How's your aim, Cat Noir? Why, perfect, of course, he said with a wink. She handed him half the Lucky Charm blob, then leaned over the edge and called, Hey, Roger Cobb! He lifted his arms in her direction, but before he could fire, she and Cat Noir began hurling large chunks of slime all over him. Some of it stuck to his face and chest, but most of it landed right on top of his cannons, and it wasn't long before they were completely jammed. Ladybug leapt off the building and ran up to him, using her yo-yo to swipe the chain with the akumatized object off his neck and tossing it to the ground. With a quick stomp, she crushed the whistle and stared at it in satisfaction. Don't forget to capture the Akuma, Cat Noir prompted from over her shoulder as they pointed to the dark butterfly that had emerged and was beginning to make its way up into the sky. Ladybug hurriedly flung her yo-yo and snatched the Akuma before it could go any further. "Gotcha," she said, and sighed in relief as she watched the little white butterfly drift off into the distance. "Thanks, partner." Cat Noir grinned. "We are a team, after all." Ladybug nodded, and without thinking lifted her fist to his as they said in unison, "Pound it." Hope you enjoyed. This is the first part to an ongoing story that I've been working on for a while now, and I'm really excited to finally get to share it with you guys. I'm not too sure when the next part will be out since I'm kind of sick at the moment, but if you're from the future, it's probably definitely out and you should go watch the next part. But if you're watching this video the same week I'm making it, it shouldn't be too long till the next part is out, and I really appreciate all your support up till then, and after, and before. Thank you all so much for all your encouragement, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen to my story. Hope it brightens it, and thank you so much for listening. Bye!